The first time I saw the mark on Sophia's arm, it was a late summer evening in Illinois, the kind of night when the cicadas scream from the trees and the air is heavy with heat that refuses to lift. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the two of us eating spaghetti I'd thrown together after church. I watched her twirl the noodles with careful precision, as though any wrong movement might draw attention she didn't want. When she reached across the table for the salt, her sleeve slid back just far enough to reveal it, a deep purple band, narrow but unmistakable, circling her forearm like a hand had been there too long. I froze, not outwardly, but inside my body went cold, the way it does when a nurse recognizes something more dangerous than a fever or a cut. Bruises have languages, and I've spent decades learning to read them. This one spoke of fingers that tightened until skin broke beneath their grip. Sophia noticed my eyes on it. In one quick motion, she tugged her sleeve down again, her fork clattering against the plate. Her gaze snapped up to mine, wide, guarded, almost pleading. And in that look, I recognized two things: fear and silence. Most people might have let it slide. Teenagers. Bruise all the time. Sports, stumbles, roughhousing. But I'd been a nurse too long to accept easy answers. Accidents scatter, leave uneven shapes, fade quickly. This one was clean, deliberate, and new. Still, I said nothing. My spoon stirred. The sauce idly. Though my pulse was thrumming in my throat, I didn't ask. Who did that? Because I already knew the same man who sat at the head of the table when we ate at their house, the same man who spoke with the kind of voice that made everyone else shrink a little smaller, her father. My son-in-law. He wasn't here tonight. He didn't like visiting my home unless appearances demanded it. Too humble for him, I imagine. He liked to hold court in his own kitchen, where the chair at the head of the table was carved out just for him. I can still see the way he leaned back there, chewing slowly, pretending to listen to conversations he had already dismissed. He never yelled in front of me. Never raised a hand when I was in the room. But sometimes silence reveals more than words. I'd seen how Sophia's laughter cut off midstream when he glanced her way, how her shoulders stiffened at the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, how she seemed to fade into the wallpaper whenever his hand twitched against the table. That night, in my kitchen, she tried to cover it with chatter. "I'm fine, Grandma. Just tripped over a desk at school," she said, as if rehearsed. Her voice had that practiced brightness, like a nurse trying to reassure a patient before an injection. Gave her a soft smile, the kind that says, "I hear you, but I don't believe you." Then I said, "Well, desks can be tricky things, always in the way." She exhaled, almost relieved that I didn't press her, but I was pressing, just not. Out loud inside, I was cataloging every detail: color, placement, depth. That bruise told me more than her words ever would. "You see, my daughter, Sophia's mother, died 10 years ago. Some say time dulls grief, but I've found the opposite. Time sharpens it. Every year that passes makes the absence heavier, not lighter. And when I looked at Sophia, tugging her sleeve, down, eyes darting away, I saw more than my granddaughter. I saw her mother again. Same long hair, same shy smile, same way of folding in on herself when someone stronger wanted her smaller. And a thought stabbed me so suddenly, I almost choked. On it. Is history repeating itself right under my nose? I swallowed the lump in my throat and reached for my glass of iced tea. My hands were steady, though inside me, something old and cold had begun to wake. Nurses know how to wait, how to watch a symptom unfold before rushing to intervene. Some illnesses reveal themselves only in time. And some battles, I had learned, could only be won by choosing the exact right moment to act. I didn't push Sophia that night. I let her eat in peace. I let her hide behind her sleeve, and her practiced. Excuses, but I marked it down. In my mind and in my heart. Because bruises heal, but patterns don't. When she left later that evening, I hugged her a little tighter than usual. She stiffened at first, then melted into the embrace like she hadn't been held in a while. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You know I'm always here, right?" She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. Then she was gone, the screen door banging shut behind her, her figure swallowed by the dusk. I stood there for a long time, listening to the cicadas scream in the trees, and I made myself a promise right. Then, I had buried one daughter already. I would not bury another child. My name is Margaret Torres, 72 years old, widow retired nurse. People look at me now and see gray hair pulled into a bun, hands spotted with age, knees that creak when I rise from a chair. They see what time has taken. What they don't see is what time has given. I spent 4 decades walking the fluorescent halls of Chicago hospitals, steadying, shaking hands, calming, screaming patients, reading the signs of injuries that people tried to explain away. I've seen accidents, I've seen mistakes, and I've seen cruelty hiding behind excuses. The body rarely lies, and neither do my instincts. After my husband died, and after my daughter was laid to rest far too soon, I poured myself into caring for my granddaughter. Sophia became my reason to keep going, the one light left after the house fell quiet. She'd come over after school, sometimes with paint-stained fingers or stories about friends, and for a while I believed she might escape the shadows that had once swallowed her. Mother, but shadows have a way of returning. Now at my age, people expect me to fade quietly, to tend to gardens and knitting, to let the world pass me by. What they don't understand is that old women who have lost too much are the most dangerous kind. We carry memories like weapons, and patience sharper than any blade. And I was patient, watching, waiting, ready. To move the moment, the truth refused to stay hidden. It didn't happen all at once. That's the hardest part to explain. With Sophia, the changes crept in little by little, quiet enough that most people missed them. But I've spent a lifetime watching patients decline, and I know how to track the slow fade of a spirit. She used to laugh freely, shoulders loose, head tilted. Back. Her voice carried through my house like sunlight, filling corners I thought would always stay dark after her mother was gone. But lately, her laughter came less often. And when it did, it ended too soon. Cut off, like someone had thrown a blanket over a flame at church. She began sitting closer to her father, her posture rigid, her eyes lowered when others asked her questions. At school pickup, she no longer bounded toward me with stories spilling out of her mouth. Instead, she shuffled, head down, backpack, hanging heavy off one shoulder, the art supplies she once begged me for, sketchbooks, watercolor sets, colored pencils, sat untouched in her bedroom. I noticed dust gathering on them, the silence of things abandoned, small changes, each one easy to dismiss if you weren't looking closely. Teenagers are moody, people said. They pull away, they get quiet. And maybe that's true for some. But I've learned to tell the difference between privacy and fear. What I saw in Sophia was fear. Fear that clung to her like a second skin, muting her voice, stiffening her shoulders, stealing pieces of her that should have been untouchable. And once fear takes root, it doesn't stop on its own. You don't have to raise your voice to control a room. Some men know this instinctively. Sophia's father was one of them. Whenever I visited their house, I felt it before I even saw him. The shift in the air, the way the walls seemed to tighten. He didn't storm, didn't shout, didn't make scenes. He sat at the head of his table like a king in a borrowed kingdom, and everyone else learned quickly how to shrink into their places. Dinner was the clearest stage, Sophia quiet, pushing food around her plate more than she ate it. Her father cutting into his steak with slow, deliberate movements. He asked questions not out of interest, but to remind you he was listening. How was school? Not a father's warmth, but a test Sophia would answer in short, clipped sentences, her eyes never lifting from her plate. And when she spoke too long, when her words carried even a hint of confidence, I'd see it. The twitch of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes just enough to silence her. No strike. No insult, nothing anyone outside the room would call abuse. But I knew better. Silence can wound deeper than fists. A glance can train a child better than a belt ever could. I once watched him interrupt her mid-sentence with nothing more than a raised hand. She stopped cold, like a switch flipped. No protest, no rolling of eyes like most teenagers. Just obedience. The kind that's learned, not natural. He wrapped his control in performance, too. When neighbors stopped by, he draped, his arm around her shoulders. Smiling wide to anyone else, it looked affectionate. To me, it looked like a vice grip. She'd sit stiff beneath his touch, her smile practiced, her body angled away as if to reclaim just an inch of space. And when he did acknowledge me, it was polite, always polite. "How are you holding up, Margaret?" His voice carried just enough weight to remind me of my age, of what he thought I no longer had, power. But he underestimated me. I had seen men like him before. Though never in family homes, I saw them in hospital corridors, in waiting rooms where wives kept their voices soft and children shrank into corners. I learned that control doesn't always come with broken bones. Sometimes it comes in the form of shrinking laughter, slumped shoulders, eyes that dart before answering, and I recognized it in Sophia. Every meal, every interaction, I cataloged it. The way he praised her only when it made him look good, the way he spoke for her when others asked questions, the way her hands trembled ever so slightly when she passed him a glass. I didn't confront him, not yet. Timing is everything in both medicine and survival. Intervene too early, and you risk making things worse. Let it play too long, and the damage becomes irreversible. So I sat through those dinners, smiling when he expected it, sipping my wine, storing every detail in the vault of my memory. He believed his silence kept him untouchable. He didn't know I was already listening to what the silence was screaming, and I decided, quietly and firmly, that one day soon I would make sure his silence was broken for good. Sometimes, when I looked at Sophia across the table, it was like seeing a ghost, not the frightening kind, but the quiet ache of someone who should still be here. My daughter, Elena, had the same dark hair that fell in waves over her shoulders, the same nervous smile when she felt the world pressing too close. I used to watch her hum in the kitchen while stirring a pot of soup, sunlight spilling across her face, as if she could outrun the shadows that seemed to follow her, but she never truly did. When Elena died, the official word was accident, a late-night drive, a sharp curve, a crash that took her life before she could even call for help. But even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if that's the whole truth. The bruises she brushed off, the way her laughter dimmed in her last years, were those just coincidences? Or was history repeating itself long before Sophia was old enough to notice? It's a dangerous thing. Doubt it burrows in and makes a home inside you. Some nights I still hear Elena's voice in my head, telling me she's fine, insisting she's strong enough to handle things on her own. And I remember believing her, wanting so badly to believe her that I ignored what my gut was screaming. Now, when I see Sophia fold into herself, when I see her eyes drop the same way her mother's once did, I feel that same scream inside me. Only this time, I refuse to silence it, because I couldn't save my daughter, but maybe I could still save her child. Guilt is a heavy thing. It doesn't sit on your shoulders. It seeps into your bones, settling so deep you forget what it feels like to move without it. I carried guilt for Elena every day since the night she died. People told me it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have known, couldn't have changed. What happened? But a mother always wonders. Could I have asked one more question? Pressed a little harder when she brushed me off? Insisted that she stay with me the night she drove away? That kind of guilt ages you faster than time. It keeps you awake at night, replaying conversations, searching for signs you missed, and when you find echoes of those same signs in your granddaughter, the lowered gaze, the sudden quiet. You feel that weight double. I promised myself after Elena's funeral that if I ever saw the shadows creeping back into Sophia's life, I wouldn't look away. I wouldn't let politeness or fear of confrontation or the desperate hope that things might improve on their own keep me still, because guilt never goes away. But maybe, just maybe, it can be used as fuel, and I was ready to burn every ounce of it if it meant saving Sophia. I wasn't the only one who saw the changes in Sophia, at least, not at first. Her teachers mentioned she seemed quieter, less engaged in Class A neighbor. Once told me she'd waved at Sophia in the driveway, and the girl hadn't waved back. Just ducked her head and hurried inside. Even at church, people noticed she no longer sang along with the hymns she used to love, but in America, we have a way of brushing these things off. We wrap our discomfort in easy phrases. Teenagers are moody. She's just growing up. Give her space. It's easier to explain away silence than to ask why it's there. Her father encouraged those explanations. At gatherings, when someone asked about Sophia's quietness, he'd chuckle and say, "You know how teenagers are always with their moods." He'd ruffle her hair like a doting parent, and everyone would smile, reassured. No one looked close enough to see how she flinched at his touch. I did. It reminded me of patients I'd cared for, who tried to disguise pain with polite nods and tight smiles. I learned then that silence isn't nothing. It's a message. One most people are too uncomfortable to translate. Everyone else ignored the signs. Maybe they didn't want to believe them. Maybe it was easier to keep the picture of a happy family intact. But I couldn't afford denial. I'd already lived through what denial could cost, and this time, I wasn't about to lose the person I loved to it. Some people look at a bruise and see an accident. I see a history. I see the pressure that caused it, the angle of the strike, the timing and how the colors bloom. Nursing trains you to observe what isn't being said. To read the body like a chart, and with Sophia, her body was speaking volumes, the way her shoulders curled forward like she was always bracing for something. The small tremor in her hands when she passed me a glass, the way she startled at sudden noises, eyes darting to the nearest doorway before she calmed herself. Most people would have dismissed these things, filed them under nervous teenager, but I knew better. These were survival patterns, instincts forged in homes where love and fear lived too close together. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I picked Sophia up from school. She used to run toward my car, ponytail bouncing, waving so hard I worried her arm might fall off. But those days were gone. Now when she spotted me, she walked slowly, backpack hanging like an anchor. Her eyes searched the parking lot before she reached my car, like she was checking to see who was watching. One afternoon, her father came instead. I stayed in my car across the street, watching. He leaned against his truck, arms folded. Jaw set, Sophia approached like she was walking into a storm. No smile, no sparkle, just a small nod before she climbed in. He put his hand on the back of her neck as she slid into the seat. To anyone else, it might have looked affectionate. To me, it looked like ownership. She stared straight ahead, frozen, as he closed the door behind her. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Kids who live under fear don't confess outright. They leak the truth in small, unguarded moments. Once, Sophia came over to my house and winced when I hugged her. She covered it quickly with a laugh, saying she'd just pulled a muscle in gym. Another time, she dropped a glass in my kitchen, and before I could say a word, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Over and over, eyes wide as if she expected me to explode. The worst was when she flinched at the sound of my teapot whistling. She laughed it off, but her face had gone pale in that split second. I didn't push her. Not yet, but every one of those moments went into my memory like files in a cabinet. And the more I gathered, the clearer the picture became. People think silence is weakness. They're wrong. Silence can be strategy. If I confronted her father without proof, I'd lose Sophia. He'd tighten his grip, twist the story, paint me as the meddling grandmother who couldn't accept that times had changed. If I pushed Sophia to admit too much before she was ready, she might retreat even further into herself, so I kept my mouth closed and my eyes wide open. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is to wait. That didn't mean I was passive. Far from it, I started noticing things others missed, a forgotten pharmacy bag in their trash with bandages and antiseptic. A receipt from a hardware store, new locks, heavy bolts, marks on the doorframe of Sophia's room like it had been slammed too hard, too many times. I overheard arguments too. Once, when I stopped by unannounced, I heard his voice through the door, low, sharp, like a whip. Sophia's replies were soft, almost inaudible. Then silence, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps and a door shutting upstairs. When he opened the front door to greet me, his smile was smooth as glass. I started writing things down. Dates, times, observations, patterns, not guesses, not hunches. Facts. Because facts, I knew, could withstand scrutiny when excuses could not. The more I collected, the more I saw his strategy. He didn't lash out at random. He chose his moments carefully, striking where no one else could see, a bruise high on the arm where sleeves would cover, a cutting remark delivered just softly enough that others wouldn't notice, a slammed door followed by laughter when guests arrived. He was careful, but I was careful too, and little by little, I was building a case. The trick with men like him is that they don't just hide, they perform at church picnics. He'd slap backs, shake hands, donate generously to the raffle. People called him a family man. He'd help carry chairs, talk about his job, brag about Sophia's grades like a proud father. I watched the way others admired him, nodding along, convinced they were seeing the real man. But I saw the flicker in Sophia's eyes whenever his hand touched her shoulder, too firm, too possessive. She'd smile politely, but her body tilted ever so slightly away, as if trying to create an inch of breathing room. Charm can be the cruelest mask, because when the world sees a saint, it becomes harder to convince them of the devil underneath. I realized quickly that observation wasn't enough. If I wanted to protect Sophia, I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. So I began researching late at night. I sat at my kitchen table with my old laptop, scrolling through articles about child protection, laws, domestic abuse cases, and recording regulations in Illinois. I called a former colleague from the hospital, now working in social services, asking careful, hypothetical questions. I learned what was admissible in court. I learned how to document safely. I learned that one strong piece of proof could outweigh 100 denials, and I started preparing. I visited a small electronics shop run by a retired police officer I once treated after an accident. He remembered me, and when I asked for discreet recording equipment, he didn't pry. He sold me a pen with a built-in camera, a picture frame with hidden storage, and a small audio recorder no bigger than a thumb drive. The next time I visited Sophia's house, I brought gifts. A framed photo of her mother to put on her dresser, a small decorative clock for the living room shelf, a USB drive I pretended was loaded with old family photos. In truth, they were my eyes and ears. From that point forward, every visit became reconnaissance. I checked angles, adjusted placements, ensured batteries were charged. I told myself this wasn't spying, it was protection. And if he truly had nothing to hide, then nothing would appear, but the files I began collecting told another story entirely. By the 6th week, the evidence was undeniable. Recordings of him shouting, belittling, threatening, footage of Sophia flinching as he slammed a hand against the wall beside her, audio of her small, trembling voice, whispering apologies for things no child should apologize for. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. So I called Caroline, an old friend from my nursing days, who now worked in family law. We met at a quiet diner off the highway, a place where no one knew us. I slid a folder across the table, my hands shaking for the first time in months. Inside were printed transcripts, screenshots, stills from the recordings. Caroline didn't speak for a long time. She just read, her coffee cooling untouched beside her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hard. "This isn't suspicion, Margaret. This is evidence, and it's enough to act." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You did the right thing. Now we just have to pick the right moment, because once this starts, there's no turning back." Her words echoed in my head all the way home. No turning back, and I knew she was right. The moment was coming. I just had to be ready when it arrived. I've never been the sort of woman to leap without looking. My years as a nurse taught me that rushing into treatment without a full picture could kill a patient just as quickly as the illness itself. Still, there comes a moment when hesitation is more dangerous than action. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday night. I had dropped off a casserole at their house, an excuse to check in. From the sidewalk, I glimpsed Sophia through the front window. She was standing in the kitchen, shoulders stiff, while her father loomed over her. I couldn't hear his words, but his body said enough, fists clenching, chest puffed, jaw set like he was about to explode. And then I saw her flinch. Just a quick movement, but enough to snap something inside me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the dark screen of my phone. My daughter had flinched like that once too, when she thought I wasn't watching, and not long after, I buried her. I couldn't bury Sophia, too, so I made the decision. No more waiting. It was time to gather proof so solid that no charm, no excuse, no smooth lie could erase it. The next morning, I drove across town to a small security supply shop. It was owned by a retired Marine. I'd once tended after a car wreck. He greeted me with a limp and a grin, and though years had passed, recognition flickered in his eyes. "What brings you in, Nurse Torres?" he asked. I leaned closer over the counter. "I need something discreet, reliable. The kind of thing no one notices until it's too late." His grin faded. He didn't ask questions. Men like him didn't need to. Instead, he walked me through the shelves, pointing out devices one by one, a picture frame with a lens hidden in the corner, a smoke detector that doubled as a camera, a clock no bigger than a paperback with a pinhole eye, all motion-activated, all time-stamped. He placed them gently in a box as though handling medical instruments. Then he showed me a tiny audio recorder shaped like a thumb drive. Battery lasts 20 hours, sensitive enough to catch whispers. I nodded, heart pounding. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a lifeline. I handed him cash and carried the box out like it was a newborn. In a way, this was the beginning of a case, the start of a fight. I intended to win on the drive home. I thought of Elena. How different things might have been if I'd had this kind of proof back then. How much I wished I could go back and save her. I couldn't change the past, but I could damn well change the future. The trick was slipping the devices into the house without raising suspicion. Luckily, being a grandmother has its advantages. People expect you to show up with small gifts and fuss over decor. The first was a picture frame. I told Sophia it was one of her mother's. Old photos, newly printed for her dresser. She smiled faintly and thanked me, never noticing the tiny lens in the corner. The second was a smoke detector. "This one's a little nicer," I said, as I climbed a chair to install it in the hallway. Her father raised an eyebrow but didn't object. What kind of man argues about safety? The last was the clock. I wrapped it in paper and handed it to Sophia as a late birthday gift. She placed it on her bookshelf without hesitation. Each device went live the moment I left, silently recording the world inside those walls. And for the first time in months, I felt a sliver of control returning. He thought he held the stage. He thought his cruelty lived in darkness. But I had just flipped on the lights. The first file nearly broke me. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, earphones snug, listening to the grainy audio captured by the thumb drive. His voice filled my ears, low, sharp, brimming with disdain, useless. You can't even set the table right? What do I work for if you can't handle the simplest things? Sophia's reply was so soft, I had to turn the volume all the way up. I'm sorry, Dad, I'll fix it. There was a pause, then the sound of something slammed against the counter. My heart clenched. The next recording was worse. His words weren't shouted. They were hissed, poisonous. You think you're better than me? Just like your mother, always pretending you're smart. Don't forget who puts a roof over your head. Her breath hitched. I could picture her shrinking into herself, head bowed. The video files were no easier. One showed him shoving past her in the hallway, his shoulder striking hers hard enough to send her stumbling. Another caught him gripping her wrist until she yanked it free, rubbing the red mark afterward. It wasn't just anger. It was control, calculated and precise. He knew how far to go, how to hurt without leaving marks where others could see. I saved every file twice. Once on an encrypted hard drive in my home, once in a cloud account only I could access. If he ever found one copy, the other would live on. Each click of save felt like loading another bullet into the chamber. Evidence is the quietest weapon, but also the deadliest when used at the right time. Over the next 6 weeks, the pattern sharpened. The recordings showed him growing bolder. Yelling over dinner served 5 minutes late, mocking her artwork until she tore pages from her sketchbook, gripping her shoulder when she tried to walk away. The cruelty wasn't random. It was ritual A, daily stripping away of her spirit. And Sophia, my sweet girl, learned to shrink further, to fold herself into corners, to whisper apologies she didn't owe. Each new file carved another line into my resolve. I no longer questioned whether he was dangerous. The only question left was when to strike. Some nights, I'd sit in the dark with the laptop closed, hands trembling, heart heavy. Part of me wanted to storm into that house, tear her away from him, and dare him to stop me. But another part, colder, wiser, knew that if I acted too soon, he'd twist it against me. He'd call me senile, accuse me of meddling, claim I was making things up because I couldn't let go of my daughter's death. And maybe, just maybe, Sophia herself wasn't ready to admit the truth. Survivors cling to denial like a shield. It feels safer to minimize the pain than to confront it. So I carried the weight alone, knowing it would break me if I held it too long. Patience is not passive, it's a discipline. Sharp as steel, I reminded myself of this every day. I told myself that every file I saved, every observation I noted, was another brick in the fortress. I was building around Sophia, that the time would come when those walls would hold firm and his lies would crumble. Patience doesn't mean inaction, it means readiness, and when the right moment arrived, I would be ready. I'd waited too long with Elena. I would not wait too long with Sophia. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon. My phone rang, and his voice slid through the line like oil. "Margaret," he said, smooth and polite. "We're having a family dinner next Sunday. It would mean a lot if you came. Sophia would love to see you here." It wasn't really an invitation. It was a performance. I could hear it in the way he emphasized family, like a dare, like he was drawing boundaries I wasn't meant to cross. But beneath the honey in his tone, I caught the steel. He wanted me there to show me that his house, his table, his rules still stood untouched. I agreed without hesitation. "Of course," I said, "wouldn't miss it." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. My gut told me this was it, the moment I had been preparing for. The recordings, the notes, the hidden files, all of it would find its place soon. The battlefield had been chosen. I only had to step onto it. The days leading up to that dinner were thick with unease. I moved through my routines like a soldier packing gear. I charged batteries, checked storage backups, printed stills of recordings, made copies of transcripts. Every piece of evidence was organized into folders, one for me, one for the lawyer, one for safekeeping offsite. I called Caroline, my old friend who worked in family law, and told her what was coming. "I'll be there," she promised, "and I'll bring paperwork ready to serve." In the quiet of my home, I rehearsed my words, not fiery speeches, but calm truths. Men like him thrived on twisting stories. The only way to defeat that kind of power was with something undeniable. Each night, I slept lightly, listening for the phantom sound of my daughter's voice in the dark. Elena's memory was with me always, reminding me why patience mattered, but also why timing could not be missed. By Sunday morning, my stomach churned like I was heading into surgery. I drove across town with a casserole in the passenger seat, the same way I had so many times before. But this time, it wasn't just food I carried, it was evidence. It was resolve. When I parked in their driveway, I saw Sophia standing at the window. She raised her hand in a small wave, then dropped it quickly, as though afraid of being caught. Her father's shadow moved behind her, and she vanished from sight. I carried the casserole up the walk, my steps steady, my heart hammering. The door opened before I could knock. He stood there, tie neat, smile stretched too wide. "Margaret," he said warmly. "Right on time." I smiled back, but mine was the kind of smile you give a man before drawing the scalpel. The dining room was already set, the table groaning with food he'd arranged. Like trophies, his family began trickling in, his mother, his sister, his brother-in-law. They greeted me with polite nods, false warmth. Sophia moved around the edges of the room, silent as a shadow. Her hair hung long to hide her face, her shoulders curved inward. When our eyes met, I gave her the eye's smallest nod. She didn't nod back, but I saw the flicker of hope, quick and fragile, before she looked away. I scanned the room the way I always did, marking exits, calculating sightlines, noting where I could stand if things turned old habits. Necessary habits. The air was already tight, brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. Dinner began with his mother leading the charge. She leaned across the table, voice dripping with sugar. "Sophia, dear, you should smile more. You're such a pretty girl when you try." A ripple of polite. Laughter followed. He joined in, shaking his head. "I keep telling her that, Mom. She doesn't listen." Sophia pressed her lips into a thin line. A few minutes later, his sister chimed in. "Remember when you tried soccer, Sophia? 2 whole weeks before you gave up. Guess some people just aren't cut out for discipline." More laughter. More glances at me, as if daring me to object, and then him. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine like a king surveying his subjects. "Discipline builds character. Some people understand that, some don't." His eyes flicked to Sophia, then to me. The table chuckled again. I stayed quiet, not because their words didn't cut, but because I was waiting. Every jab, every insult, every calculated comment was another thread tightening around his own neck. He wasn't just belittling her. He was showing the others what he believed power looked like. And soon, that belief would be the weapon that undid him. It happened when the conversation turned to futures. His brother-in-law bragged about his wife's promotion, about how proud he was to have a partner with ambition. His mother stabbed her fork into her plate. "Ambition is important," she said sweetly. "Some women just settle." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. For a long moment, Sophia said nothing. Then, in the smallest, steadiest voice, she whispered, "Respect is important too." The room went silent, forks hovered midair, heads turned, and his eyes locked on her, slow and deliberate. He stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. His hand moved quicker than breath, striking her across the face with a crack that split the air like gunfire. Sophia's head snapped sideways, hair flying, her cheek already reddening. She didn't cry. She just froze, trembling, as silence swallowed the room. For a heartbeat, no, one moved. His family stared wide-eyed, some in shock, some with that awful flicker of satisfaction. But I moved, slowly, deliberately. I pushed my chair back and rose to my feet. "Sit down," I said evenly, my voice steady. He turned to me, eyes blazing. "This is between me and my daughter." "No," I said, stepping forward, calm as a scalpel in a surgeon's hand. "This is between you and the evidence I've been collecting for weeks." I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The dining room filled with his own voice, harsh, venomous, unmistakable, useless. "Just like your mother." The recording echoed through the room. Undeniable gasps rose from his family. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His sister went pale. I held the phone high. That's one of dozens of recordings, video, audio, all time-stamped, all backed up. Law enforcement already has copies. His face drained of color. He took a step toward me, but I didn't flinch. "You thought silence protected you," I said. "But silence was your mistake, because I was listening the whole time." Behind me, Caroline rose from her chair, pulling a folded document from her bag. "You're done," she said firmly. "Effective immediately. You are barred from this home. A protective order is in place. You will leave now." The room erupted, his family shouting, denying, pleading. But over it all, I kept my eyes on him, for the first time since I'd known him. He looked small, not powerful, not commanding. Just a man caught in the glare of truth he couldn't escape. Sophia lifted her head, her eyes red but steady, and I thought of Elena, how she never got this chance, how her voice was smothered before it could be heard. Not this time. This time. The silence had been broken. The crack of his hand against Sophia's face was still echoing when I rose from my chair. The sound had frozen the table. Forks suspended, mouths open, eyes darting between shock and complicity, but my hands didn't shake. My breath didn't falter. Years of holding the line in emergencies had trained me for moments just like this. "Sit down," I said evenly, stepping forward. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the stunned silence like glass shattering. He turned toward me, rage simmering beneath his skin. "This is between me and my daughter." I shook my head once. "No, this is between you and me, because for weeks I've been preparing for this night." His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He was used to control, used to silence. But the room wasn't silent anymore. The air was different now. Every step I took toward him was deliberate. Each, one reclaiming ground he thought belonged only to him. He tried to sneer, but I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. Men like him sense when power begins to slip. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The dining room filled, with his own voice, sharp and unmistakable. "You're useless, just like your mother." Gasps rippled around the table. His mother's fork clattered against her plate. His sister's face drained of color. He lunged forward. "Turn that off." I didn't flinch. That's one of dozens of recordings, video, audio, time-stamped. Each one saved in multiple places, each one painting a clear picture of who you really are. On the screen, another clip played, grainy footage of him shoving past Sophia in the hallway, his shoulder slamming into her small frame. She stumbled, catching herself on the wall. His voice followed. "Can't you do anything right?" His family sat frozen. No one laughed now. No one defended him. I looked him dead in the eye. "That's the truth, Ethan. The truth you thought you'd buried under charm and silence, but silence can be recorded and lies crumble in the face of proof." His face twisted. "You've been spying on me." "Protecting," I corrected calmly. "Every second of this is legal. Every second of it, admissible. and every second of it is who you are when the world isn't watching. The room shifted. His mother, always quick with excuses, sat, pale and trembling, unable to form words. His sister stared down at her plate, shame written in the tight line of her mouth. His brother-in-law muttered something under his breath and pushed back from the table, distancing himself. The air was thick with betrayal. For years they had played their parts, laughing at his jokes, dismissing Sophia's silences. Now the mask had cracked, and none of them could deny the face beneath. For the first time, I saw them not as his allies, but as his witnesses. He jabbed a finger toward me, his voice rising with desperation. "This is entrapment. You planned this. You came here tonight to humiliate me in front of my family." His words grew louder, wilder. "You think you can destroy me with lies, with edited recordings? Everyone knows how teenagers exaggerate. You're just bitter, still clinging to your daughter's memory and poisoning her child against me." He turned to his mother. "Tell her, Mom. Tell her this isn't what it looks like." But his mother's lips trembled, no words coming out. His sister kept her gaze fixed on the table, refusing to meet his eyes. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. I stepped closer, lowering my voice until the whole table had to. "Lean in to hear humiliation?" I said softly. "That's just the byproduct of truth. What you're feeling right now isn't my doing. It's the weight of your own actions finally catching up to you." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You controlled a child. Through fear, you broke her spirit piece by piece, and you thought no one would ever hold you accountable. That ends tonight." His face twisted with fury. But he had no words left. Caroline chose that moment to rise. She'd been silent until now, blending in among the guests, but her presence carried its own authority. She reached into her bag and unfolded a document, the crisp sound commanding. "The room's attention, Ethan Callahan," she said firmly. "This is an emergency protective order, effective immediately. You are to vacate these premises and have no contact with Sofia Torres." His head snapped toward her. "You can't just—" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This order is court-approved, supported by documented evidence. Of abuse you will comply, or law enforcement will remove you. Do you understand?" The room fell silent. He sputtered, looking around the table for allies, but no one moved. His brother-in-law leaned back, arms crossed. His sister stared at her plate. His mother's hands trembled in her lap. "You can contest this in court," Caroline continued. "But until then, you have no authority here. Sophia's safety comes first." I stood beside her, steady as stone. "You had your chance to be a father." I said, "You chose to be a tyrant instead." Caroline laid the paperwork flat on the table. "This includes a no-contact clause, no calls, no texts, no messages through others. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." His jaw clenched. "This is my house." "Jointly owned," she corrected, "but the court has granted temporary exclusive occupancy to Margaret and Sophia. You'll have your chance to argue later. For now, you leave." His chair scraped loudly as he shoved it back. His face was red, his breaths ragged, but he could see the truth. The battle was lost. He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair, movements jerky with anger. For a moment, I thought he might lash out again, but the eyes of the room were on him, and the proof had already stripped him bare. "This isn't over," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. I met his glare. Without blinking, "It is for tonight." He stormed out, the door slamming behind him so hard the walls rattled. Silence followed. Not the silence of fear, but the heavy, stunned quiet that comes after a storm has passed. I turned to Sophia. Her cheek was red, her eyes glistening, but for the first time in years I saw something flicker there. Not joy, not yet. But relief, and in that fragile relief, I saw hope beginning to take root. The night he was forced out, I drove Sophia back to my house. She sat in the passenger seat with her backpack clutched to her chest, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The streetlights cast long shadows across her face, and every time we passed one, I saw the redness still blooming on her cheek. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just held that bag like it was, a shield, her knuckles white. I remembered the way she flinched when the door slammed behind him, the way her body tensed, as though he might burst back in at any moment. Even with the protective order, even with Caroline's steady voice, Sophia hadn't truly believed she was safe. Not yet. I drove slowly, carefully, my eyes on the road, but my mind turning over the weight of it all. I had promised myself years ago I wouldn't bury another child tonight. For the first time, I believed I might have kept that promise. When we pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment. Finally, I reached over and laid a hand gently on hers. "You're safe now," I whispered. She nodded, but her eyes stayed forward, fixed on the dark trauma doesn't dissolve in a single night. But this was the first step, and I knew enough about healing to know that sometimes the first step is the hardest. Sophia barely spoke during the first few days. She drifted from the bedroom to the kitchen and back again, moving like a shadow in someone else's life. She jumped at the sound of the phone ringing, stiffened whenever the floor creaked, and never let her shoes stray far from the front door. I didn't press her. I made meals, left books by her bed, folded blankets on the couch. I let her set the pace, just as I had with frightened patients who needed space before they could. Except care one night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table long after midnight, sketchbook open in front of her. The pencil hovered above the page, unmoving. She looked up, startled, then quickly closed it. "You don't have to hide that from me," I said gently. Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. Still, the fact that she had opened the sketchbook at all gave me hope. Caroline worked quickly. Within a week, the protective order had been extended, granting Sophia and me sole occupancy of the house. Court dates were set for charges of domestic assault and child endangerment. The process was clinical, almost cold. Forms, signatures, hearings. But beneath the paperwork was a heartbeat. The proof we had gathered, the recordings, the videos, the timestamps. Ethan tried to stall, filing motions, sending his lawyer to argue technicalities. But the evidence was airtight. Every objection was struck down with another clip, another transcript. The law moved slowly, but with each filing, each ruling, I felt momentum building. The tide was turning, and this time, it wasn't in his favor. The courtroom was sterile, hard benches, pale walls, the quiet hum of the air conditioner. But the tension inside was anything but sterile. Ethan sat at the defense table in a pressed suit, his hair combed neatly, his face carefully arranged in an expression of wounded dignity. His lawyer painted him as a strict but loving father. A man misunderstood, a victim of a vindictive grandmother who couldn't let go of grief. But then the recordings played. One by one, the jury and the judge heard his voice, sharp, belittling, cruel. They saw Sophia's flinches on grainy video, the way she curled into herself when his shadow loomed over her. They watched the slap captured on Thanksgiving, undeniable in its violence. His lawyer objected, claiming context, claiming exaggeration. But context didn't change the sound of a child whispering, "I'm sorry, I'll do better," after being shoved against a wall. Sophia sat beside me, pale but steady. She didn't testify. Caroline made sure she didn't have to, but her presence was enough. Every time the recordings played, the courtroom saw the same girl sitting there, living proof of his cruelty. By the end, the lawyer's arguments sounded hollow. Even to his own ears, the verdict came swiftly. Ethan Callahan was found guilty on multiple counts: misdemeanor assault, felony child endangerment. The sentencing wasn't as heavy as I might have wished. Probation, mandatory counseling, community service, and a 5-year no-contact order. But prison wasn't the only punishment. For a man like him, Control was everything. And now, the law had stripped it from him. He could no longer call, no longer text, no longer step within a mile of Sophia. Every attempt to reclaim power would only tighten the chains around him, and for the first time in years, Sophia exhaled. Without fear, Sophia never set foot back in that house. When the legal dust settled, we arranged to sell it. She told me she didn't want her belongings, didn't want to carry the ghosts with her. I packed what I could salvage: a few clothes, the sketchbooks, framed photos of her mother. The rest I left behind. When the papers were signed and the keys handed over, Sophia didn't look back. Neither did I. Some places don't deserve to be called home. With her share of the settlement and some help from me, Sophia rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the Say. Walls were bare at first, the rooms echoing with emptiness. But they were hers. We spent a weekend furnishing it with second-hand finds: mismatched chairs, a sofa with worn cushions, a table that wobbled just slightly. Sophia laughed when we tried to balance it with folded cardboard. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from her in months. "Doesn't have to be perfect," I said, handing her a mug for the cabinet. "Just has to be yours." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Slowly, the light returned. Sophia picked up her sketchbooks again, filling page after page with color. She took a part-time job at an art studio, teaching children how to paint. I visited one afternoon and found her kneeling beside a little boy, guiding his hand across the canvas. Her laughter floated through the room, easy and unguarded. At home, she began humming while she cooked, just as her mother once had. The silence that used to hang around her was gone, replaced by music, by warmth, by life. One evening, over coffee in her new kitchen, she looked at me and said, "If you hadn't been there, Grandma, I don't know what would have happened." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "You don't have to know," I said softly, "because I was there and I always will be." Her smile then was small, but it was real, and in it I saw not just survival, but strength. Late at night, when the house is quiet and Sophia is safe in her own bed, I find myself thinking of Elena, my daughter, my child who should still be here. I think of the way she used to hum while cooking, the way she'd draw tiny sketches in the margins of her notebooks, the way she laughed so easily before the weight of her marriage dimmed that light. And I think of the way I convinced myself everything was fine, because she said it was, because she smiled, because I wanted so badly to believe. The truth is, denial is a dangerous comfort. It lulls you into silence, convinces you that waiting will make things better, that love will fix what's broken. But silence doesn't fix anything. It feeds the harm. I will always carry the guilt of not asking harder questions, of not pushing past Elena's reassurances, of not protecting her when she needed me most. That guilt carved itself into me the day I buried her. But when I look at Sophia now, her laughter returning, her sketches filling with color, her voice no longer trembling, I feel a different weight. Not guilt, not grief, but redemption. I couldn't save my daughter, but I saved her child, and maybe, in some small way, that means I've honored Elena's memory. Maybe it means that the cycle that consumed her ends with Sophia. I like to think Elena would be proud that her daughter is free, proud that her mother refused to stay silent again, proud that even in her absence, her story became the spark for change, because Elena's life was more than her pain, and Sophia's future will be more than survival. Generational pain is like a disease. It passes quietly, through silence and denial, from one household to the next. Children raised in fear often grow into adults who believe fear is normal, and so the pattern repeats. But it doesn't have to. The night I confronted Ethan, I wasn't just standing up to him. I was standing up to the cycle itself. I was saying, this ends here, with me, with us. Sophia doesn't have to carry her mother's silence. She doesn't have to live in the shadow of what broke Elena. She has the chance to build something different, something whole, and that, more than any courtroom victory or legal sentence, is what matters most. If you're listening to this and you see the signs in someone you love, believe them. Don't explain it away. Don't hope it improves on its own. Watch closely, ask questions, pay attention to what isn't being said, and if you're the one living in silence, know this: you are not invisible. The marks you hide, the apologies you whisper, the way your laughter fades, someone can see it. Someone can help. Protection isn't always about shielding someone from a single blow. Sometimes it's about dismantling the source of harm so it can't rise again. Sometimes it's about patience, about gathering truth until the moment comes to act. And when that moment comes, act with everything you have, because silence protects no one. Truth does. Old age doesn't make you weak, it makes you patient. And patience, when wielded with love, is the most dangerous weapon of all. And that's where this chapter ends: a grandmother who refused to stay silent, a girl who found her voice again, a cycle of pain broken not by force, but by patience, preparation, and truth. Stories like these remind us that evil doesn't always roar. It often whispers, hiding in the corners of families, in the silences of homes. But silence is not the end. With courage, with strategy, with love that refuses to give up, even the quietest voices can be heard again. If this story reached you, share it. Someone out there might need the reminder that they are not alone, that the shadows can be broken, and that sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who fight not with fists, but with persistence and love. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay watchful, stay kind, and never underestimate the quiet strength of those who refuse to give up.